So let's explore a couple concepts from Greek theater. Let's talk about fate. And to talk about fate, I want to introduce a science fiction trope of a time loop. I'm not saying that Oedipus Tyrannos is an example of science fiction, but a prophecy is seeing into the future. So, we'll play with this a little bit. But in this time loop science fiction trope, someone who wants to prevent a past event travels back in time, and every action they take ends up causing the very thing that they wanted to prevent. The In Oedipus Tyrannos, every action that the characters take, Oedipus, Jocasta, even Laius, the shepherd's mercy to the baby Oedipus, the Corinthian messengers' happy, truthfulness, even Oedipus's quite sensible leadership pledge to banish the killer. Every one of those actions seems like a perfectly rational act of a person's free will. But as the play progresses, we see that every action is really just a link in an unbreakable chain that ends up confirming the Greek view of fate, which is that you can't escape your fate, and to try to avoid your fate is arrogant. You're playing God. Hamartia. This word is often thought of or translated in more modern literary analysis as tragic flaw or fatal flaw. But really, it's not so much a vice or a sin, not to Aristotle anyway. It's an archery term for falling short of your mark, missing the mark, hitting some target that you didn't necessarily aim for. To Aristotle, it was an internal force driving the protagonist to make choices that drive the tragic ending. And that hamartia, that internal force, could be duty or truthfulness or loyalty. It could be an honest mistake. It's not necessarily a vice like pride or greed. So, to the ancient Greeks, the whole concept of a tragic flaw or a fatal flaw or a weakness of the character is a little bit off the mark. Oedipus's situation is driven by perhaps something different than a vice or a sin, and I'm not going to talk about that because I hope you can explore that on your own. Peripeteia, we can think of that as the point of no return, and I want to place that in the concept of a typical story structure. A typical story will start with exposition. It describes the situation, introduces the characters and what they want in their relationships and what their society is like. Then there's an inciting incident that gets the plot story, and maybe that inciting incident happened before the play began. But at any rate, the play progresses with complications. As the characters react to the inciting incident, then unexpected consequences happen, and the characters have to make more choices that raise the stakes higher. At a certain point, there's a critical revelation after which the protagonists no longer can turn back. And for instance, in the one act play Trifles, it's when the women discover the body of the dead bird, when they finally put all the pieces together in the puzzle. From that turning point, you have the climax, which is when sort of everything happens, when the story is at its emotional height. And for Oedipus Tyrannos, that would be when Oedipus enters blinded. We see the results of his actions and he starts to lament. Once he's lamenting, however, kind of nothing else happens in the story, but things wrap up. That's the falling action where Creon banishes Oedipus in order to fulfill the prophecy which told Creon how to restore the health of Thebes. Let's talk about catharsis, the process of purgation, of cleansing yourself. In Greek tragedy, the play was supposed to invoke the emotions of pity and fear. Pity, we feel bad for the hero. Fear, we worry that we ourselves might meet such a fate. And a good tragedy, according to Aristotle, includes emotional release. We see the thing that we fear, but because it didn't happen to us, it doesn't defeat us. Encountering these emotions through art makes us wiser and stronger and better people because we can kind of do a dry run of how we would respond to these experiences in our lives by watching another character go through them. And that's part of the value of any art, but Aristotle was very clear in describing this particular value for theater of his time. The Oedipus Complex. Jocasta in the play says at one point, in their dreams, a lot of men have slept with their own mothers. And she says that in order to keep Oedipus from worrying, saying, well, the dream isn't that big a deal. You didn't do the deed, so don't worry about it. For Freud, children aged 3 to 5 see their same-sex parent as a rival for the affection of their opposite-sex parent. And to Freud, passing through this stage is normal. It's how kids naturally develop a healthy moral conscience and a sort of sexual identity. But to Freud, trauma can make adults revert back to this phase, or maybe they never grow out of it. And that leads to bad things and complex things. Now, the field of psychology no longer takes sort of Freudian sit on the couch and tell me about your dreams as the best form of therapy. Modern psychology recognizes that, drugs and changing your environment and therapy, a combination of those things, is better than just sitting on a couch and sort of sharing your dreams. So even though Freud's theories are really no longer prominent in modern psychology, Freud demonstrated his theories by analyzing well-known characters so that his readers could understand his methods. And so Freud rather famously analyzed Oedipus and also Hamlet from Shakespeare. He wasn't doing it in order to analyze literature. He was using stories that he assumed people knew well in order to teach his methods. And in the process, he kind of developed a process that literary scholars have found very, very productive for understanding characters and story development. Okay, so I hope that has given you quite a few new things to think about, and I'm very curious to see how you can take a passage from this play that you think is worth exploring and connect it to some idea from this lecture and demonstrate how you can make those connections that operate on a level above summarizing the content of what you've learned and above listing your emotional responses to what you've read. So, happy reading, and I'm looking forward to your reactions.